Rob, we're now live on the podcast. I appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So you were the head coach at Wabash Valley, which is notoriously known as one of the best junior college baseball programs in the country for 26 years. I mean, you were the top, on the top of the mountain. You were the king. Um, Yet you still left. Why did you decide to leave when you were pretty much at the top? You had everything made, and now you decide to go and coach at the Division I level. Like what was your thought process with that?
Mhm. Well, that's a layered and stacked question. But it's always been in the back of my mind making that jump. But I loved it at Wabash Valley. It was great for my family and myself. I love what junior college stands for. But after 26 years, I always talked about if an opportunity arose that was a good fit for me personally and for my family, and I'd definitely take a look at it. And through the years, Coach Reardon and I have talked about if this situation ever came up, would I be interested in working together and the whole 9 yards? And so of course that's something we talked about, and because I think anywhere you want to go, I think you gotta trust that person. You gotta feel good working with the entire staff, but and then thrown in Western Kentucky was a place I was tremendously familiar with. So there was a lot of things that stacked up and lined out. And it was one, when I thought if I was ever going to make that jump, then everything added up, and I was like, why not? So for me, it was a perfect fit, and my wife was totally into it, and I felt it was the right time.
So you're in your when you first took over Wabash Valley, the team went 12-34
Hmm.
in 1996. The next year, you guys went 37-16. So that was a massive turnaround. And then I started doing some more research. I was like, man, like that's impressive. Like in just his first year, he turned that around. And then I looked in Western Kentucky in 2022, the year before you got there, 18-36. Then you got there in June, right after that 2022 season. And then this past season in 2023, you guys were 33-26. So another big turnaround. So what's the secret sauce? You have something. There's something you have that clearly, I mean, this isn't a mistake here. It's a common theme that wherever you go, you win and you know how to win and get good players. I mean, what's the secret? Can you spill the beans here?
Well, sure. Well, I think that number one is just building the foundation. I mean, the culture is a huge thing that, Coach Reardon will talk about all the time, and he will hammer that into the ground, something fierce. So I think that's important. And that was our biggest thing as far as here was absolute dominating that aspect. I think it's the other part is just getting the most out of your players and not expecting him. We honestly didn't think we were going to do what we were supposed to do. I mean, we're confident coaches and all, but honestly, this year was just to build it, get a foundation down. So we made a big jump this year, but it had a lot to do with culture, and we added some pieces late recruiting wise that helped us. We didn't cut one player from the previous staff and the previous team, so we stuck with the guys, and obviously we had a little bit of a turnover this year, but it was just getting the most out of your players and getting the most out of what you have, and the expectations were just getting better. That was the biggest thing. And in that Wabash Valley, I was so young, I hardly remember how it happened, but I think the guys just kind of rallied behind, our staff, and just sometimes I think that that's a big deal. Is change is good for the players and good for the program, but they just rallied behind me and the rest of the staff, and from then at that point on, it was just about recruiting and getting better players and better fit.
You've mentioned culture a couple times so far. Like, how do you go about instilling culture, building that foundation that you talked about?
Well, number one, let's from the very get go, it's about getting better players and players that fit your system and what you're trying to do. And that's just not on the field. It's just guys off the field, how they work. To us, it's getting the best players you can and the best people you can that's just going to outwork people. I mean, we're always trying to get the most talented player. But let's be real honest here. The talented players that we always want the same players that LSU is trying to get, but we have to get players that somehow maybe they fall through the cracks, maybe they're close, maybe for whatever reason somebody doesn't recruit them, but we have to get guys that fit what we're trying to do, and that is obviously guys with grit, guys that are talented, guys that want to play, but guys just want to play for us, and so there's a lot that goes into that, but at the same time, you've got to get players that are good enough. And that takes a lot of time recruiting. So you have to recruit anywhere and everywhere and get the right guys.
Yeah, so how does that process work? You're constantly on the phone, you're constantly on your laptop or computer talking to
Mm-hmm.
people. Like, how do you go about identifying those players that you're talking about? Because to your point, you're 100% right. The best players, everybody knows who they are, right? I mean,
Right.
they stick out like a
Mm-hmm.
sore thumb. So how do you find those diamonds in the rough?
Well, sometimes it's about going where they're not. I mean, there's showcases everywhere. There's your top travel teams everybody knows about. We're not going to reinvent the wheel here, but we are going to try to beat the bushes, and a lot of times just try to expand our recruiting base. I mean, we get kids from all over the country, and I did the same thing at Wabash Valley. We had kids from, 4 different countries, and we had players from the East Coast, West Coast, you name it, and that takes time to build a network, and it takes time to dig on players. It takes time to do research on players, and so you know what you're getting into. But I think the biggest thing that I've learned through the years about recruiting is developing relationships where you trust people and developing relationships with your players that you're bringing in. And so there's so much that goes into it, but it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes a passion that. But the biggest thing, like I said, I really believe that it's developing relationships with the players, with coaches, with scouts, with, and then trusting ultimately your eye and trusting your gut, because there's going to be guys that other coaches really like, the obvious ones, but then there's guys that are on the fringe of this guy could go either way, and you're just going to have to trust your gut on how you feel he's going to develop.
Do you have any stories of any players that maybe you recruited, you didn't think that they would perform at that high of a level? You kind of just maybe just needed a filler guy at the time or something like that, and they just took off. And you're like, man, what did
Yeah,
I miss here?
right. I tell you what, 2 years ago, we had a team that finished third in the World Series out there at Grand Junction, and we had 7 out of our 9 starters were really not recruited in high school, or maybe got cut from a Division I school. Um, so there are so many stories that I can tell you, but um, one guy in particular was last year or 2 years ago, a player by the name of Brian Comer. He actually played behind a first round Arizona State, and so for whatever reason he didn't play at all, and he kind of slipped through the cracks, and somehow he ended up at Wabash Valley. And there's a lot of players, a lot of active players, a lot of coaches and scouts passed up on him in the fall because he didn't do anything at Arizona State, and he just stayed the course. But he ended up being a player of the year for us in junior college. Helped us, get to the World Series and helped us do some tremendous things. And but he's just one guy that was a player of the year, that we took probably 2 days before school started at Wabash Valley, and then 2 years previous to that, another player by the name of Kel Baker was a National Junior College Player of the Year. He was cut at Cincinnati. Um, he was a little bit overweight and out of shape, and he knew that. We took him another week before school started, and he ended up being the Player of the Year in junior college. It was actually the Triple Crown winner that nobody wanted in the fall. It just developed and got better, and ended up at Ole Miss. Um, and did, like I said, had a great career for us. Did a nice job at Ole Miss. So those are a couple guys, but I can go on and on about guys that we took and just helped develop. And I think it's just guys staying the course. And like I said, we're not reinventing the wheel, but I think that our biggest thing is just trying to work, and outwork people, and pay attention to developing guys and make sure that's really important for you, and you have a plan for each player. But there's a lot of guys that I could go on and on about, but those are two guys that were both junior college players of years that were not recruited, and were like, holy cow. And they did, they overachieved.
What was your, I would say, I don't know if this is the right word, but like selling point for getting some of these guys to go to Wabash? Because the way I look at it, there's a lot of junior college baseball programs out there, and it's not like one has just phenomenal facilities like LSU type facilities, and then everybody else has just bad facilities. Like it's pretty much common, and so it's kind of, in a sense, it's equal playing field from at least from the way I look at it. So like, how are you able to build this juggernaut year after year after year and get all these good players? Like, is it just a reputation thing? Is it like, what was the selling point that you think you were able to get so many good players?
Well, as time went on, as we were building our program, I think that obviously it was getting really good players that to help to help us win and move forward. But at some point the selling point was we didn't have much at Wabash Valley as far as facilities. We're in the middle of nowhere, town of 7,000-8,000 people, but we used that to our advantage. Selling it to parents and kids like, hey, this is what you're going to be getting into is two things: school and baseball. And your son is going to come here and have no distractions, and he's going to be a part of something special. He's going to be a part of something that after 2 years he's either going to go to a really good 4-year school or hopefully get drafted. And so we talked about that, we sold that, we embraced it. And parents knew that they were going to be in a safe place, and they were going to be around coaches that really, just cared about their development as a student, as an athlete, and just getting better. So that's all we had time for. We filled up their day, from sun up to sundown, with baseball, school, weights, individual meetings, you name it. We took full advantage of our hours that we were allowed to deal with in junior college. So it was totally about player development, getting better.
What was a typical day like in the fall?
Oof, it was there'll be days, usually we lifted 4 times a week. We'd go early at 6:30, 6 o'clock in the morning with a good lift. They would go to class from probably 8 to 12. They would have their lunch. We'd come to the field from 1 to 2 and have early work. Our practice then would start as a team from 2:15 to where we didn't have any more light. So sometimes it was 6, sometimes it was 7, and then after that, we'd have a study hall session. And so it was all the way till 9 o'clock at night. And hopefully by that time they were exhausted and went to bed and just did it all over again. And so that part is awesome, for, players in junior college. And that was a typical day in junior college. And here at Division I, it's different, but we're still doing some amazing things to help our players, get better.
Yeah, what's been the biggest transition, what's been the biggest adjustment you've had to make from junior college to coaching at Division I level?
I would say that just being more creative with, our time that we do have, and the rules and regulations and that kind of stuff. But you know what? The bottom line for us is it's still recruiting really good players. For us, it's also about, just having a plan for them and making sure that we can, get the most out of our time that we do have. But recruiting the same. We're recruiting the same players. We're recruiting, just good players. And the game is still the game here. Nothing's really changed for us. It's just for me personally. I'm doing a little bit different things, but it's still teaching and developing players and working with the staff and working with people. Honestly, when you get in the coaching profession, it's about developing people. It's about working with people.
You said you're doing some things a little bit differently. Like, what would be an example of something you're doing differently?
I would say we have smaller groups, more analytical stuff, more stuff, that we do is that we're able to have, we're just able to have different, different things to work with our hitters. I think the player development side, from whether it's, TrackMan to Rapsodo to just cracking things, we're able to have different, I say gadgets and just player development things that we're able to have. It's going to be more helpful for our players. But ultimately, it's still about working with our players and developing a relationship. It's just nice to be able to have those things.
Where do
That
you
was
find yourself like gravitating towards? Is it more on the pitching side, the position player side, hitting side? Like where do you fall in line, or is it a little bit of everything?
more on the hitting side, but ultimately it's about offense. I think it's just about everything. The cool thing is when we work with our players, we want to be well rounded. And so for me, I'm on the offensive side, working with the hitters, but it's more than just hitting. It's base running, it's defense. It's different kind of hitting for us because we want our guys to be good all around hitters. Um, and it's not just one way. It's just there's many ways to get our players better. So I just talk about offense.
What are your like from an offensive standpoint? I mean, are you someone who utilizes some of the technology? Are you more so
Mm-hmm.
like combine the old school, new school? Like what's kind of your stance on everything?
I would say it's combining the old school and new school, and find what players understand and how can we get, into their learning curve of how they can learn their body and how things work. And but I'm a combination of all of it. I'm just a coach that's going to be a lifelong learner of all of it. And obviously for me, it's about learning some of the new stuff, and I want to make sure that um, I'm around it so I can learn it, teach it. But ultimately, the most important thing for me is to be able to develop trust with our hitters and understanding. And so we'll match it up as best we can from old school and new school.
How do you go about developing that trust?
I would say, observing them first and not making crazy changes with them from the get go. Learn their swing, learn how the body moves, learn how they learn, and then ultimately sitting down and spend some time with them as a person and just communicating on a daily basis and listening to them. It's a combination of all of them, and I think that trust is important. Understanding that we're not going to change a kid's swing from the very get go. Otherwise, it's like why recruit a kid if you're just going to change them. So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's a lot of communicating.
What about in terms of going back to offense from offensive standpoint? How do you go about helping a player build a plan at the plate? Like game planning with hitters, game plan against a pitcher. Like what's your process for that?
Well, I think that we have our absolutes. We have as a team. Obviously we do all the scouting reports and stuff like that, but at the same time, we want to also stick with what we believe in with an approach, and that's adjust and flow in games. And you can have a scouting report down to T with everything that we have and everything everybody else has these days, and synergy and whatnot. But when the game starts, things change. So we will have a game plan based on a picture or what a team does, that kind of thing. But we'll also have our plan. The most important things we just talk about simple things. I mean, if you have a scouting report on a pitcher and if he's a slider guy and he's not landing his slider, then it all goes back to what we talk about as the first 20 pitches. What are the pitcher doing? What is the umpire? What kind of zone does he have? What's the weather like? I mean, you name it. The first 20 pitches is going to dictate how we react to the rest of the game.
What's the competition like in your guys' conference? Like, what's it? Were you surprised at the level of play, or is it about what you expected?
It was what I expected. We knew it was a really good conference. I mean, it's been known as a top five conference for the last several years. Aside from some of the Power Five conference, I mean, this is as good as there is. I mean, it's fun. It's competitive. I mean, there's no tough week. There's no easy weekends. I can tell you that right now. So, but it was like I expected, and the biggest thing is it is a jump from Division One, just because guys more experienced. And the talent level in some cases may be similar, but it's just kids are smarter, they're more experienced, more mature, more physical, and so. But at the same time, to break it down, we just worry about competing against the game, and it keeps it all relative.
Who do you like watching on TV? Who do you like studying certain hitters? Do you like watching certain teams? Like, how do you go about continuing to learn and grow as a coach?
Listen and watch coaches, and I love going to every clinic possible. I love just going to other teams' practices. I love sitting down and and talking with coaches of other sports. I mean, I love listening and watching our football practices, or even volleyball practices. Just learning from how coaches do things and have success from all different sports. And for me, it's I can learn a lot from football coaches. I can learn a lot from basketball coaches, but ultimately, you can learn from anybody. And so I just try to talk and communicate and branch out to as many coaches, aside from just my network, to learn different things and see what works for us, and see what works for our program and for me personally. So yeah, that's a good question, but I am open to things, but at the same time, I try to take a little bit from everybody and just try to work, learn from how I can teach things, what works for me.
What are some of the things that you're looking to pick up if you're going to watch a football practice at Western Kentucky or a volleyball practice? Like, obviously it's not going to be anything
Right.
technical to baseball, but like from a coaching
Sure.
standpoint, like what are you looking for?
You know how he organizes his practice so you can get the most out of it on an individual standpoint and a team standpoint, and how much does maybe makes his team compete in a group setting, in a team setting, how he organizes the most important thing that I talk about is time. Is the time's the most valuable thing on earth. And so how can you know, organize that to where your team's getting better and also an individual, and how you have some competition, um, inside of that practice.
Would you mind sharing like maybe an example of what you would recommend for other coaches, maybe high school coaches listening to this, or maybe other college coaches, on how to go about what you just said, organizing practice, organizing your time, so you
Mm-hmm.
can get the most out of it? Like if you have a
Sure.
2 or 3 hour time slot, like how would you go about
Mm-hmm.
organizing the practice to get the most out of, and from a development
Yeah.
standpoint, just everything?
Sure. So, a couple different things, and there's different views on this. But for us, obviously, when we got to practice, there, understanding how important it is to have a good stretch, having that mobility plan is so important. So, we would start off, with the mobility plan and a good stretch, and then we get right into base running. And I felt like what we're doing here is we're going to run the bases. We're not just going to steal base, but we have a plan and being smart on each base. But so we'd go over base running for 10 or 15 minutes and hit on that. Then after that, our bodies were warmed up, and so then we'd go into throwing, and so we'd have a throwing routine that we do it every single day. And that's important for guys to understand, is the throwing part and the fielding part needs to be structured where there's something on the line. So we do our absolute throws, our progression throws, but then it would build into getting loose, but we condense it backwards where, hey, we have to understand that when we play catch, it's with a purpose. And so we would have, our throwing drills be competitive. If we missed, we'd change lines. If we missed, we would, do push-ups. So we would do something to help our guys understand how, to be accountable, that it's not okay to miss playing catch. And we do that on a daily basis. And we'd add something in there. So then after throwing, that was competitive. And so we'd move into some team offense or team defense on that day. So, but we never wanted to miss some individual stuff. So, for example, on defense, we'd get right into infielders, outfielders, catchers. We'd try to have a coach at each deal, and that would be more of an individual thing. So we'd have 15, 20 minutes of that. Then we get into team stuff, and so we would do team offense, team defense, all in one. And we'd do a situation where it was batting practice that was competitive, and so we'd have a different theme on each day for one of our batting practice, and it would last probably an hour and 15 minutes. So there's a lot of things that we do here. We did at Wabash Valley. We called it live dead. We'd do one live round, we'd do two live, and then we'd take a pitch off. And so, we didn't make everything competitive. We'd put something on the line for a winner or loser team, and so that would go pretty far. And then at the end, we'd do competition, to whether it was defense, whether it was offense, and those kind of things. So we try to cover all the bases every day. and then afterwards would have some time to have some individual work. So it was, and it's similar to that here. It's just not enough hours that we had as opposed to junior college.
If someone were to come watch you coach, what type of coach would people say you are? Are you someone who's like high energy during practice? Are you more laid back? Like, what's your coaching style?
I would say I was a lot of energy. I enjoy having fun, but practice is a little bit different because I feel like, hey, this is our time. It's got to mean something. So we would challenge the living daylights out of our players and on a daily basis. I like to think the games are, like we talk about all the time. Practice is the coach's time, and game time is it's show time for players. We don't want to have to go over things and put any pressure on guys during games, but during practice, I felt like any coach that we all love the sport, but practice, to me is a is my kind of what I talk about, my sanctuary, and I enjoy that part. I enjoy interacting, but I also enjoy watching the guys get better and accomplish in each drill, getting better in each drill, getting better in each practice that we do. So yeah, we bring the juice a little bit in practice.
You guys do like pitching machines, or is it you
Yep.
throwing? Like, what's the batting practice usually like?
So BP is we mix it up almost on a daily basis. A lot of machine work, um, a lot of angle BP. A lot of times that I'll throw BP or the coaching staff will throw BP. We'll mix it up with fast, gains, sliders, and we will get after them. And there's days when we have candy BP where we just try to make them feel good and feel good about their swing, feel good about their body, feel good about their mind. And so we will mix it up on a daily basis.
I like that candy BP. I haven't heard that one before. I like that. Yeah, that's really good. What I mean, you've coached for so many years now. Like, what's something that like if you looking back at your career, like you wish you would have known early on and it would have been able to impact more and more players. Like, obviously there's always things as
Mm-hmm.
coaches who, like even for myself, it's like, man, if I did these certain things earlier on, I think I could have helped a couple more of these players,
Mm-hmm.
that I've learned. Like, is there anything that sticks out to you? And the only reason I ask that is I just think it's always good to learn from each other and help other
Yeah.
coaches who maybe are listening or just starting out now too.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So I think just have an open mind to what other coaches. You have your staff, and I think it's important to be able to listen to what other coaches see in your players. Um, for example, I see certain things in a player like yesterday at practice. I was seeing a guy cut himself off in his swing a little bit. Where another coach said, what, let's just swing a better pitches. And so sometimes I think it's important just to listen to your entire staff and communicate with them, be open minded, to how we're going to ultimately get this player better. So, and obviously for me, it's kind of videotape everything as much as I possibly can. For example, we have this new system here at West Kentucky. It's called Aware, and it's awesome. So you can see every practice from about 8 different angles. So you go back through on a daily basis, watching practice and saying, okay, how can I improve on that? And I think those are important things, to be open minded and to videotape every practice to how you can get better. Because when you're in practice, sometimes you're going through, you don't really realize, how important it is to see yourself do things. So I'm learning and picking up on that.
When you're watching video, are you watching like your own, like what you're
Mm-hmm.
specifically doing?
Watching, and then like for example, we were doing different kind of style BP yesterday, where it was actually we were testing some bats out, and so we were doing some different things in practice where I could actually see each statesman to see if they were on time with me, because we were working on some base running stuff as well, but it was off the front shoulder, it was off some timing stuff, and so it was great to be able to see if guys were actually on time with things. And we always talk about how important timing is. Well, timing is like this big tool, and doesn't that just doesn't stand for hitting. It stands for base run. It stands for everything. So I was actually watching how guys were on deck, if they're on time with me. I was watching the base runners, if they were on time with me. I was watching, myself as far as what I was teaching guys, and watching other coaches as well. So that is an awesome feature if you can you can watch practice on a day basis. And it's what they do in football, and it's what they do in basketball as well.
How long will you spend watching the practice? I mean, will you watch the entire thing?
Sometimes, and sometimes, they're longer, and sometimes you just pick out things that you were like, all right, how bad did that look during that time of practice, or how good did that look? So I'll pick up certain points, and I'll write things down, and we'll go over some things, the next day. So it just helps me stay organized and helps me develop myself.
I bet that also just it helps. Well, from a player standpoint, they're probably like, man, they can't slack anymore in practice because everything's being
Yeah,
videotaped.
it's amazing when you as a coach know that you're on video as well. Like, all right, I mean, it's good for our different staff to talk about it and see it. Like, hey, we can get better in that aspect. But when you're on video, I think you hold yourself accountable a little bit more.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
that's in all areas of how you walk, how you talk, your posture, body language. That we require our guys to hold themselves accountable to how they act and how they walk and their posture.
Do you also, I don't know if you know Brian Kane on the podcast, but he's more like a
Yeah, he's
mental.
awesome.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
one of the things that he does, I know, is he'll go to games and with baseball players and hitters that he works with, and he'll videotape them like as they're walking up to the plate,
Mm.
and then he'll go over the video with them
Hmm.
after the game. Like, is that something that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I just started doing it more so the last few years. But it's a wonderful thing to do when people actually see how they look when they walk, when they talk, and how they do things. I mean, there's some real good things in the mirror there that's gonna help you.
Awesome. Well, Rob, I appreciate you coming on today, man. It's been a ton of fun.
Heck
Can't wait
yeah.
to follow along. And again, man, thanks for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you very much.